Good morning, students, parents, other family members, and guests. I'm very pleased to welcome you to Stony Brook University on this rather weather uncertain day, and to this lecture. This is one of the many events scheduled to celebrate and welcome Dr. Samuel L. Stanley, an accomplished educator, medical practitioner, researcher, and the 5th president of our great university. Peter Bagent, in his introduction just a little while ago, referred to Dr. Stanley's medical credentials. And while these are very impressive, those of us who have worked closely with him these past few months are equally impressed with his understanding of and his commitment to all of the elements that make a university great. Dr. Stanley embraces for us the totality of the academic enterprise, from the lettered disciplines and the arts to the sciences and medicine. He will also help lead Stony Brook's efforts to build upon the foundation of our critical relationships with Brookhaven Lab and Stony Brook and Cold Spring Harbor Lab to achieve our next generation of successes. Dr. Stanley, we have found, is articulate, thoughtful, deliberative, and very strategic in his approach. He embraces a leadership and management style that empowers people to do their jobs. At his formal inauguration ceremony yesterday, those attributes were clearly evidenced, and the assembled university community responded to him with great warmth. This is a very exciting time for Stony Brook. I am sure you will join me in looking forward to Dr. Stanley's tenure, and are confident, as we are, that his presidency will bring many new and forward-thinking opportunities to our institution. I thank you again for joining us in celebrating this historic occasion for our university and our new president. And it is now my pleasure to welcome President Samuel L. Stanley to the podium.
Thank you very much, Brent, for those really very kind remarks. And for those of you who were just in the previous session, I'm not going to repeat any of the jokes or anything I did before, so don't be worried about that. One of the things I wanted to do during this thing I've called the inauguration marathon, which is going about 8 days, was to really give an opportunity for all of us to hear from some of our most distinguished faculty. And so I've had a number of lectures that are moving forward. One of them, for example, was from Richard Leakey, the world famous anthropologist, probably the most famous anthropologist in the world. We've heard, and we will hear from a number of other distinguished faculty. And today, this lecture falls into that category, so it was officially designated as one of the presidential lectures for the series. And again, it tells you how confident I am that we're going to have really something to be very proud of. So 4 years ago, Stony Brook set out to establish the first and only journalism school in the entire city system. And that's actually kind of surprising because, here we are in New York, the media capital of the country, and there wasn't one journalism school in the entire state public college system, which, is 64 campuses, 430,000 students. So with this initiative in mind, it turned out to be a wonderful coincidence that at that time, today's speaker, Howard Schneider, was leaving his post as the editor of Newsday. Howie had been a reporter and editor at Newsday for more than 30 years. For 18 of those years, he had been the paper's managing editor and then editor. And during his tenure, Newsday won 8 Pulitzer Prizes, including prizes for investigative journalism, foreign reporting, breaking news, and arts criticism. Howie himself has been a member of the Pulitzer Prize judging panel 3 times. He is also a recipient of the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism's Alumni Association's Outstanding Alumnus Award. Former Stony Brook president Shirley Kenny, who I'm pleased to say was on campus yesterday, asked Howie to spearhead the effort to create the new school in 2005 and named him the founding dean. Both agreed that at that time that the news media was in the midst of a transformation due to the digital revolution, which has now spawned not only new realms, I think, for legitimate news, but also the literal tsunami, I think, of information, the blogs, now Twittering. We're really inundated more than ever before with things that are facts, things that are clearly incorrect, and and things that fall in between that we all have trouble determining whether or not they're true or not true. And everyone agreed that it's more important than ever, I think, to bring rigor to this process and really to train a generation of journalists that are capable of performing and capable of delivering the truth in these very complicated times. So never before, I think, it's been more important, in fact, to have ethical journalists in this profession. But along the way, Howie took a detour, and he realized it wasn't enough just to train these journalists, but it also was important to train the people as well. That really, of course, we're the target for all of this. And so he set out on a second mission, a mission I think is equally as important, and a mission that no other school of journalism at that time was engaging in. And that was to train the next generation of news consumers who would be able to judge for themselves how to identify information that they could trust. So in 2006, Howie and his colleagues created the nation's first course in news literacy. To date, more than 4,000 Stony Brook undergraduates across every discipline have enrolled in the course. And with the help of more than $2 million in grants from several foundations, the School of Journalism's Center for News Literacy, established in 2007, is now sharing the course material with universities and high schools across the country. The News Literacy course is a 3-credit, 42-hour course, but Howie tells me he intends to teach it to you today in 45 minutes. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll have a question and answer period after Howie speaks, so you have a chance to ask him questions about the presentation. But now, please join me in welcoming the Dean of our School of Journalism, Howard Schneider.
So first, let me thank the President for his kind remarks. He was officially installed as our 5th President yesterday afternoon. He made a terrific speech, by the way. And I also would like to ask him a question. Is it too late to revise the goals of this lecture? Because we've already lost time. And I speak quickly, but whether I can teach the 42 hours to you in 40 minutes, I'm not quite sure. So here's my intent today. I'm going to give you a taste of what this news literacy course is all about. How we teach it, what we teach. I hope to also give you some practical pointers to take away so you yourself can become a more discerning news consumer. The other goal I have is, are there parents here? How many of you are parents of students? It was good, because I also saw some of the students here today, so I'm hoping to give you enough information so you can see if they're paying attention, okay? So we can have some conversations. So those are my goals, and I hope that we will have time for some questions and answers. Let's talk about this course. When we start this course, this is always the first screen that goes up, okay? And we tell people we're going from one John or Johann to another John in the course of this semester. And both of those figures are kind of bookend the changes in communication. We're not only teaching people to be news consumers, we are teaching them in the midst of the most profound communications revolution in 450 years. It is a blessing and a curse for news consumers, and that's the context of the course. This is really a course about critical thinking, and it's a course about citizenship. And you'll see what I mean. So we ask students right away when they come in, do you recognize these two people? And of course they say, yeah, I recognize the person on the right, Jon Stewart, and then on the left it's a jump ball. That's the Ayatollah Khomeini. Or, we get this all the time. But that's okay. It's kind of a starting point. Let me ask you right now, by a show of hands, how many of you generally think, overall, generally think that you're getting the truth from the news media overall about the information you need? Raise your hand. That's actually better than the reaction from the students, by the way. So we only got 4 of you, and we're going to talk about why, and is it justified? Is that attitude really justified? And how do we know? So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. We're going to do a warm-up exercise for starters. Go into your folder and take out the story about George Turkelbaum. Let's start, just to get people warmed up. This is a story that my daughter first called to my attention when she called me about a year ago and said, Dad, my daughter's an attorney, and she said, there is a story up on the bulletin board in our office, and you really should see it. It's an amazing story. And it's been published in the BBC, the Guardian, etc. So read the story and tell me what you think about it. It's about a man who dies at his desk in New York City at a publishing firm. Just want to get your reaction. It's a short story. here, you should know that we haven't gotten up to this yet, so you haven't seen this yet. Reaction? What do you think?
Not true.
Why? Why?
Because I've worked in an office and I know how the cleaners come around and somebody would have noticed.
So the cleaner would have found the dead body.
Would have found him.
Okay. Anybody else?
And there would have been an odor.
There would have been an odor?
That New York City Police Department or wherever this is supposed to have occurred, and the reporters who are still covering it, what the hell is it doing first running in UK?
Okay, but it's on the BBC, it's been in American newspapers and websites, it's been on Canadian websites. Anybody else reaction? Yes?
Most people blink when they're off. They blink. So you would think they would notice he's not blinking.
They would notice he's not blinking. That's probably good if he's dead. Yes. Okay, we're gonna, yes, Malcolm?
Well, he would be bloated and smelling bad.
He would be bloated and smelling bad. We'll come back to this story. We'll talk more about this at the end.
New York firm? Where?
New York firm where?
It doesn't say where, it doesn't say New York State, New York City, it doesn't say the name of the firm.
Okay, good. So we'll come back at the end of the lecture. We'll talk more about this story, okay? So let me just back up for a second and talk about, so we have the definition of our terms, what we're talking about. Because we're offering the first course in the country in this concept of news literacy. Some of you may be familiar with media literacy. This is not about media literacy. It's not about the impact of media messages and advertising. It's about news, okay? And why does it matter? So news literacy is the ability to use critical thinking skills to judge the reliability and credibility of news reports, wherever they come from. You heard the president say we're getting news on cell phones, we're getting news lots of places. Doesn't matter. Internet, magazines, newspapers, television. How can we tell if the information we're getting is reliable? And I would submit to you that this is an absolutely core competency that anybody graduating from a university in the 21st century needs. For better or worse, the news media is the world's largest school of continuing education. And when people leave school and they got to learn about the genetic revolution and they've got to learn about changes in their world, they're going to have to get their information from the news media. And so they have to be able to navigate the news media intelligently and be able to discern reliable information from information that's not. And this is one of the key slides we use in the entire semester. What do I mean by reliable information? Reliable information is actionable information. It allows you to make a decision, reach a conclusion, or take an action. When do you know when you're watching TV, or you're comparing stories, or you're reading a magazine, when do you know you've reached that threshold? Or when do you get to a point where the information is incomplete, it is suspect, it has flaws, and you can't act on it? And I would submit to you this is crucial for individual decision-making and for collective decision-making as a nation. Okay, so some examples. How do we know what's reliable? Anybody see Barack Obama's birth certificate on the internet recently? What is it? Where is it? What does it show?
It suggests that he was born in Kenya.
There's his birth certificate suggesting, in fact, that he was born in Kenya. So why do we care if he's born in Kenya? Why would we care? He can't be president. So this has been circulating all over the internet. It started during the election. I'm going to tell you how many people later in the election believe this to be true. You may laugh. I'm going to tell you how many people still believe this to be true in the United States. Now, during the election, here's something that popped into my inbox. Oh my God. Here's a gun-toting, flag-waving Sarah Palin, and this shows up in my inbox. Okay? What is this supposed to convey to me in the middle of the election? I'm trying to make a decision. Maybe it will appeal to some of us. It may horrify other people. How do we know it's real? And how can students tell if it's real? And in this case, it was pretty easy because that's the real picture. And they basically photoshopped her face on that picture. It gets more complicated, though, as we go further. It gets more complicated when you are faced with conflicting information about an issue that could determine your health or even your life. And so a tremendous example of this is what we're doing. This semester in news literacy is we're using swine flu, and the swine flu vaccine is a case study of how to get information that you can act on if you have to make a decision about taking the vaccine. How many of you here intend to take the swine flu vaccine? Okay, how many of you don't? So it's about half the room. When I ask my students, I teach 2 lectures of about 225 students. In the first lecture 2 weeks ago, I asked the students, how many of you intend to take the swine flu vaccine? Any guess what the percentage was? Anybody? How much? 60 taking it? Try 8 students out of the 225. Second lecture, 7. And I went around the room, and I'll share with you, and asked the students to tell me what information they were using to make their decision and how they knew it was reliable. And so you can understand in some respects, given the conflicting information. So you can read a news story coming from the Secretary of Health and Human Services who says flat out that the vaccine is absolutely safe and secure, and she presents information. You can read stories about the debate that's now going on about whether the vaccine is safe or not. You can turn on the television and you can hear an alleged expert in infectious disease say this.
Is that right? All right, now what do you think of the vaccination?
You know, I have more concern about the vaccine than I do about the swine flu. It's been rushed to market. There are high levels of adjuncts which basically make it more potent, so they can, it's kind of an unrefined method that they use of having these high levels of these adjuncts, including
thimerosal. It's an antiseptic preservative, and hasn't that been linked in some cases to autism?
It has, and you look at it's been shown to cause autism in children with mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, and there is controversial, though highly implicated. And the problem is you don't know if your child has mitochondrial dysfunction. I also worry about children and people who have blood-brain barrier dysfunction or it's not fully developed, which include children, pregnant women, chronic neurological illnesses, and chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. I've seen these people have been devastated by these infections.
Would you give it to your kids?
I definitely would not.
Okay. You may shake your head, and you may say, here's somebody on TV who's an infectious disease expert. Is he giving us reliable information? We'll talk more about this information later. But I just want to re-emphasize to you that people are getting bombarded with lots of conflicting information, and they need to learn how to sort through. They are not experts. They need, though, to have the critical thinking skills which we teach them to go through here and sort through information that they can find reliable. So you may say, well, some of this is not reliable, and we'll talk about that. At the same time, when health workers, a lot of medical workers are objecting to taking the shot. As you know, and Governor Patterson has now backed off from the notion that all health workers will have to take it. That sends a message to the public that there's something to be concerned about. So there's a lot of conflicting messages coming at us, and we have to learn how to deal with it. And then there's the potential ramifications for disinformation. So we had a tragic circumstance over at the hospital a week or two ago here. 8-year-old boy died. We are not sure why he died, at least the hospital people aren't. He happened to have taken a flu shot a couple of days before. The doctors have categorically ruled out that the flu shot was responsible for why he died. Not only do people not want to believe that, but websites around the country are now citing this boy as an example of someone who died after a swine flu shot. So you really need to be dynamically attentive now to begin to understand what's real and what's not real. And if you read the New York Times story on the front page about the swine flu debate, you will see the notion that this was seized upon by lots of people who were trying to convince you not to take the shot. Even though no evidence. And you've got to be smart to do that. It's getting harder. It's getting harder to be a smart news consumer. Let me tell you why. These statistics are a little staggering. So, 10,000 new websites are being created every hour. Every hour. In case you lay awake at night, wanting to know how many emails are sent every day? I know this bothers you. You probably can't figure this out. About 210 billion emails are sent every day. I don't know who figured that out, by the way. Those emails include a lot of viral information that gets passed from one person to another. Not just personal communication. Here's a story you should look at. You should be careful about the vaccine. Did you see this photo of Sarah Palin? We are getting lots more of our news and information virally. This other number in the middle is staggering to me. Comes from the Columbia Journalism Review. In 2006, I want you to see this. The world produced the equivalent of 3 million times the information contained in all the books ever written. Now, let me tell you why that's a problem. On one hand, it gives us incredible access to more information than we've ever had. No generation has had this kind of access. This is wonderful. On the other hand, this produces so much information. We go from a society that had been a society back at Gutenberg in which there was an information deficit to a society in which we have an information surplus. And there is a danger we will get overwhelmed by this tsunami. What do psychologists tell us about how we react when we get too much of something? What is the result? What happens to us?
You block it out.
We block it out. I'm going to get to block it out in a second. There's something else that happens to us when we're overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. We become passive. You understand that in a case like this, we become passive in the face of getting too much and not wanting to sort through it. Can you think of anything more dangerous for a news consumer than to become passive at a time of conflicting information? So it's getting harder. Here's what one journalist author said in a recent book: the limitless choice we now enjoy over the information we get about our world has loosened our grip on what is true and what isn't true. The other thing that's going on is that there's a lot of blurring of the lines. Who's a journalist? Who do you trust to give you information? The president mentioned that I took a detour. Let me tell you about this detour. So I'm going out planning the newest journalism school in the country, and I'm visiting other journalism schools, and I'm saying, how do we train the next generation of journalists at a time of transformation? And I'm teaching a course. We have no journalism majors. I'm teaching a course in the English department called The Ethics and Values of the American Press. And I'm teaching philosophy students, and English students, and physics students. And here's what I discovered, and they're smart, as most of the students, many of the students are here. Here's what I discovered after a couple of weeks. About a third of the students believe everything that they see or read that comes from anything that looks like a news outlet. If it says news outlet, they tend to accept the information. It could be from People magazine, it could be from Dig.com, it could be from CNN, the New York Times. They tend to give it equity. The third of the class believe nothing. Students at 19, they don't trust anything. They say to me, Professor Schneider, I don't trust anything in the news media. You're motivated by profits. You're being spun by the government. You are greedy. You're sensational. You're negative. You're biased. I believe none of it. And about a third of the students get up in this class and say, I'm confused. Is Michael Moore a journalist? Is Oprah Winfrey a journalist when she goes to New Orleans and interviews the victims of Katrina? When Al Gore does The Inconvenient Truth, is that journalism? Is Bill O'Reilly a journalist? When I go on YouTube, is that information you consider journalism? When I'm planning the journalism school, this newest journalism school in the country, I can't forget about this class. It comes back to me again and again and again. And so when we go ahead and I give a proposal to the president, we come up with the notion that we need a second mission. Nobody's doing this. The audience needs to be trained to understand what kind of information is reliable and who is a journalist and who isn't, and why that's important to them. Why that's important. A lot of confusion. Okay? Jon Stewart. How many of you think he's a journalist? Raise your hand. It's okay, by the way, to raise your hand. I tell this to the students. Don't be afraid to raise your hand. Is he a journalist? 25% of the students in America, the college students, turn to him as their primary source of news. So we'll watch a little clip.
But of course, the main symptom, as always, fear. A strain of flu that nobody has ever seen before. Health officials around the world are scrambling to contain the outbreak.
outbreak.
There are 20 confirmed cases in 5 different states.
40 now confirmed a pandemic is imminent.
Fears grow of a global pandemic like the 1968 outbreak that killed 1 million people.
1968, I remember. That was the summer of...
This time, just as the virus is about to metastasize, a breakthrough.
The FDA today approved swine flu vaccine.
Where's... Hail Zeus, the Greek god of timely pharmaceutical research. Back to your homes, people. Nothing to see here.
The H1N1 vaccine will finally become available. Is it safe?
So, we watch this together and we talk about it. I'm going to give you what the guidelines we give students to look at what's news and what isn't. And you may be convinced that Jon Stewart's not a journalist. In a recent Time magazine poll, he was voted the most trusted news anchor in the United States. Okay? Okay? So what's that all about? So one of the things that you also need to recognize is that while all of this is going on, the mainstream media, the people we used to rely on, are disappearing. We've lost 13,000 newspaper employees, and in many cases network employees, the 3 biggest networks, the broadcast networks, Fox and CNN are big. CBS, NBC, and ABC don't have bureaus, do not have full-time bureaus in Iraq and Afghanistan. The 2 places this country is now at war. The economic conditions have made it so difficult that lots of the people who used to be our filters, who were trained to be our filters, are disappearing. So not only do we have all these changes, but some of the kinds of people who we can rely on are not here to help us anymore, and so we have to do more on our own to become critical thinkers and discerning. So the course, and I'll give you a feeling for the course and 2 or 3 lessons we teach, so you can leave here maybe with some specific things. Here's how we start the course. Your first assignment. If you were in this class, here's your first assignment.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
How many of you remember this? It's a great comfort to me, because some of our students don't remember this, but actually, through the magic of reruns. So why do we give them that video? Why do we give them the video? Because their first assignment, we impose a 48-hour news blackout on all the students on campus. No news, no sports, no weather, 48 hours. Nothing. Not from friends, not from family, not from radio, not from TV, not from the internet. We want to see their reaction. Now, most of the students in this class, in these classes, are not avid news consumers. And their first reaction is, so what? What's the big deal? We've done this now for 3 years, and the reaction is incredibly intense. By the second night, some students get up and report that they're so anxious they can't sleep. They're afraid that there are missing things in the world that might relate to them. They carry umbrellas around campus. I've been blamed already for 3 or 4 colds because people said they could not get dressed. And it affects them personally. I had a young woman who was an immigrant, the daughter of Greek immigrants, who said, it made me realize how little I had to talk to my mother about. Because I realized that every morning when we get up and have breakfast, the only thing we talk about is what we hear on the radio or the television. And for 2 days, we just stare at each other. So it becomes a personal epiphany. And many of the students say, and these are students who are taking science courses and lots of other things, it's one of the most difficult assignments they've ever had. The deprivation, though, makes them understand the power that news and information has in their lives and what role it plays. So we start and we clear the palate. And the very first lesson, I'm going to give you 3 or 4 lessons of the many that we teach. I didn't teach this when I first started teaching the course. I assumed the students said, okay, let's go now and tackle the news. Let's go watch TV. Let's go on the internet. Let's look at how we can tell when we get into the interior of stories by using these skills we're going to teach you, how to decide if it's reliable. And I discovered that the students couldn't find the news. They confused what was news. And so we stopped. And we backed up, and we changed the course. And we said, the first lesson for any news consumer, the most important lesson in a world, in a 24/7 digital world, is to know your neighborhood. And we give them this grid. And the grid looks at news, propaganda, advertisements, publicity, entertainment, and raw information. What's the difference? And how do you know? And we tell them that they need to know what neighborhood they're in, because the neighborhoods are very different. And if they want to be entertained, that's fine. But if they want information that's going to inform them, and they find themselves in the publicity or propaganda or raw information neighborhood, they can be deceived and make a bad decision. And that's what this is all about. So we have all of the students find examples in each category, and they eventually work on this grid. And the grid tells them about these neighborhoods. Okay? The differences, the goal, the practitioners, etc., etc. And we need them to do this as a foundation for our class. Okay? And we need them to do it because the lines are blurry. The lines are absolutely blurry. So this week, I don't know if anybody saw this, the Chamber of Commerce puts out a press release. It goes on the internet saying that the Chamber, the largest business group in the world, is now reversing its policy and is going to support President Obama on his global climate initiative, his cap and trade bill. Wow, big story. They put this out on the internet. Lots of people pick it up, talking about it. It's fake. It was created by a group called the Yes Men, who like to create hoaxes. It was picked up by CNBC. It was picked up by Reuters, which didn't even bother to check it out, and then later had to apologize. The information is floating around. Bloggers, and by the way, a blog is a news log. There are lots of different kinds of blogs. You can have an opinion blog. You can have a blog that aggregates other people's comments. You can have a journalism blog. So don't ever use blog as kind of a one thing. Here's something though. If you've been following Fashion Week, last year there were blogs about the fashions, and we had people telling us what fashion house was doing a great job, what you should buy. Later we learned that some of these bloggers who used anonymous names were actually executives working with the companies. We tell students there are ways you can find. We tell them that anytime you see anything anonymous, anybody who's giving a testimonial, you demand accountability. You demand their names, you demand their credentials, you demand their affiliations, or you suspend your belief system. It doesn't mean it's always a lie. It means you don't act on that information. And I don't know if you saw what happened 2 weeks ago. The Federal Trade Commission has just ordered anybody who's endorsing a product in the United States, it's a big deal, they're going to have to tell you if they have any economic ties to the company that they're reviewing or the product. This is a big deal. And this is part of this information tsunami that if you're not careful and you don't pay attention to. So, here's what we do. We want to give the students guideposts. In this crazy world, what are the things you hold on to so you can critically know that you're in the right neighborhood? And there are 3 characteristics that separate news from everything else. There's verification, which is the process of trying to provide evidence. I'm going to talk about that, what kind of evidence you look for. There's independence. The information is not subject to influence or control by anybody other than the news organization trying to inform you. It has no political ties, it has no business ties, it's independent. And boy, if I'm going to tell you right now that independent information is one of the most valuable currencies we can have as a society. Because there's so much self-interested information flowing around. And accountability. Who's giving me this information? Who are they? Where do they come from? And what are their credentials? If the students can't find, as they go out and get examples in every neighborhood, if they can't find all 3 of these, they're not in the news neighborhood. They may want to be in the advertising neighborhood, that's fine. But they're not in the news neighborhood. Now this may seem simple, right? But we also give them some news stories that we think are terrific. This is not a story by telling people, it's not a course that says you can't find reliable information. Walter Reed's story a couple of years ago in Washington Post found incredible abuses at Walter Reed Hospital. Iraqi veterans coming back, many of them maimed, were faced with long delays, substandard conditions, bad treatment, at Walter Reed Hospital, which is a mile and a half from the White House. The reporters actually moved in and lived there for 3 months and documented everything they saw. And we walk through that story and we say, here, when we talk about verification and we talk about independence and accountability, here's what we mean. So the students can also see not only the deficit, but what works. So I'm going to give you your first test. All right? I'm going to give you this clip from YouTube. We send students to YouTube. How many of you go to YouTube? Okay. And there are clips about the Iraq War on YouTube. And we give this clip and we say, what neighborhood are you in? Are you in raw information? Are you in news? Are you in propaganda? Are you in publicity? Tell me what neighborhood you're in. So let's see if you can find out. About 2 minutes, more of what you see. It's the middle of a firefight. What neighborhood are we in? What neighborhood? Are we in news? Are we in propaganda? Are we in raw information that's unfiltered, that hasn't been vetted? Where are we? We're news consumers. How many of you think we're in raw? Raise your hand. How many of you think we're in news? Raise your hand. How many think we're someplace else? Sean, you're not allowed to answer because you know the answer. You've been in it. Nice try. Are you in the class? You can't answer, but thank you.
We don't know.
We do know. We absolutely do know.
Isn't that called live coverage?
Live coverage, how do we know? And this is a little unfair, but how do we know for sure where we are?
Well, if they're shooting, why ain't they taking cover?
Well, I don't know why they're not taking cover.
There were obvious edits in it.
Excuse me?
There were obvious edits in it.
Edits in it, yeah. But that's another story. How do we know? We know, and it's a little unfair for you because you've only seen it quickly, we know by the opening screen. The opening screen tells us exactly where we are. Sean, where are we?
All right, well, if you go to the, do you want the news later?
No, we just want that opening screen. It says www.mfn Iraq. That's the producer. That's the source of this video. Once we see that, we know everything. Who's producing this video?
All right, if you go to the website, it is a website. I believe it stands for Multinational Forces in Iraq. And it's basically the coalition's website where they post, information that they edit and whatnot.
This is the Defense Department web production. This is a channel on YouTube that's being run by our government. If you go to their website, they'll tell you they're only going to give you selective information that basically shows you what our forces are doing. They will not mock our forces, and they spell it out. What does this violate? Most of the students don't get this the first time around. They don't get it. We go back again and again. And so what principle does this violate? It goes independence. Once you know that that principle is violated, you're no longer in the news and information journalism neighborhood. You're not. Now, are you in the propaganda neighborhood? We can argue. Are you in the publicity neighborhood? You are no longer in the news neighborhood. If you're looking to decide what's going on in Fallujah, you don't go here. That's what we're trying to get our students to do. Lesson 2 is part of this idea of evaluating sources. It's so important. I know you know this in the abstract, but how do you evaluate sources? Let's take swine flu. And I saw the president shaking his head when he saw that expert. The president himself is a big expert. He saw the expert on Fox. But I'm a news consumer. How do I know when I go into a story or I watch it on TV? So we give the students 5 rules. And it's about weight. You as a news consumer have to weigh things, right? There's no story that's perfect. So you have to weigh the evidence and decide if it's reliable. So here's what we tell them. Name sources, people, and there are exceptions for anonymous people who risk their lives, but name sources, people in stories who give their names and stand behind information, you should give more weight to people who will not use their name. Authoritative sources are better than uninformed sources. This seems so obvious that when you go into a story or watch it, you look at what are the credentials. The fellow on Fox News was listed as an infectious disease expert. Actually, when you go on his website, he is an expert in endocrinology. There's no indication that he has much credentials in infectious disease. Independent sources are better than self-interested sources. I love watching the election campaigns. I loved watching cable TV after the McCain-Obama debate. When somebody runs up with a camera and they say to McCain's campaign manager, who do you think won this debate? What is that about? What is that about? Do I give that, if I care, if I'm trying to assess it, do I give that any weight? No. And so we have the students practice and go into stories and begin to identify which sources are independent and which sources are self-interested, and they apply it. Sources who verify are better than sources who assert. What do I mean? When people say, or you read their comments and they say, I think, I feel, I believe, but they don't provide evidence in the story, they are making a claim. They are not telling you why they feel that way and presenting you with any evidence. They get less weight than the person who says, there was a story last week about Michelle Obama and her descendants being traced way back to a little slave girl, and the genealogist in there says, I believe she's a direct descendant, and then presents her evidence in the story. Okay, it's a claim with evidence. I'm going to give her more weight. I'm going to give her more weight. And you see these claims all the time. And then we have multiple sources are better than single sources in lots of ways. So we give these general principles because we're looking to give the students analytical tools to use. And this is part of this idea of how journalists chase information and what you as a news consumer can learn on the other end. So there are different sources. Take a look at this clip from a local TV show. Tell me what you think about the sources here.
On the search for two robbers who were
I apologize, there's a little jump.
Police say the men have held up at least 9 bodegas in the Bronx just in the past few weeks. Eyewitness News reporter Carolina Terrazona is live in Castle Hill with the story. Carolina?
Well, Sandra, Diana, cops tell us that those 2 suspects have been hitting bodegas, apparently in the same area. Castle Hill here where we're standing happens to be one of them, but tonight those 2 men have been caught on camera.
You have gun, you get them inside.
Ahmed Askiam describes the fear he felt as his bodega on East Tremont was robbed at gunpoint.
You have gun. You take this, people who get hit, we take them inside.
What did he take from them?
Yeah, he take them two together. He take them in the floor, two people.
At this corner bodega on Castle Hill, also a robbery by 2 gun-wielding men who took what they wanted and ran.
They took $2,500.
$1,500?
And they took the cash out right stuff.
Police say they believe these 2 men caught by surveillance photos have held up a total of 9 bodegas in less than a month, the most recent about a week ago. All of these robberies have happened in the Bronx.
There's no partitions. People in the area know most of the grocery owners that, first name basis, they've been here for so long. So they feel safe, but then you get outsiders from a different community. They see these people as prey.
Not all bodegas have partitions, but most have live cameras.
Okay, so you watch this, and unfortunately, this is typical of much of what you're going to see on local television. Who are the sources you give weight to in the story? Who are the sources, if you're trying to understand and you live in this neighborhood, and you want to understand these robberies and why they're happening and whether you're safe, who are you going to give weight to? Who are you going to give weight to? Why? Why? What do you mean by direct source? So they saw it. They were there. They give you information. So you give them weight. Who are you not going to give a lot of weight to when you watch this? Who are you not going to give a lot of weight to once you go through our sourcing rules and you really begin to think about how you apportion weight for information?
Last man interviewed.
Why?
He's just a resident of the neighborhood. He has no expert. He wasn't involved in any of these things.
Absolutely. The last man says it couldn't be people from our neighborhood. It has to be outsiders. So do I now turn to my wife and say, outsiders are robbing everything in our neighborhood? He's uninformed. He doesn't want to believe, by the way, that it's probably people in his neighborhood as well. So we want the students to be able to just watch these things and begin to get it. Checking sources on the internet can be a nightmare. And I didn't realize that until after I taught about 2/3 of our students. Because many of our students don't go to news outlets to get news, they search for news. They go to Google and they search for news. So I'm beginning to understand this. And what I discover is they search, here's a Martin Luther King. You search for news about Martin Luther King, and what comes up first, right? There's the top things. Most of our students say, if it's coming up first, then that's news I can trust. Obviously, a lot of people are calling up those stories. So I show them this site. Up to 2 years ago, if you look for news on Martin Luther King, this was the #1 site on Google. Who runs this site? Who runs this site? Anybody know? It's now #5. We're not going to let Sean speak on this one. Anybody? Try the KKK. Oh my God. Oh my God. The KKK Stormfront runs this site, and they don't hide it. You can get fooled if you equate rank with reliability on the internet. And so we tell our students that's not what you do. Right? That we tell them about algorithms, we tell them how things work, and then we give them some practical suggestions. So if you don't know these things, I'll give you some practical help. If you go on to Who Is, this will tell you who owns the site and who pays for it. You ever want to know who owns it and who pays for it, who registered? You can find out. If you go on advanced Google search, you can find out all the links from this site elsewhere, and that will tell you. Because if this site is linking to a lot of white supremacist sites, that's going to be a shortcut to tell you that this site may not be legitimate reliable. You can go to a site, anybody go to Snopes? Snopes is a site that deals with hoaxes and false information. They have teams of researchers, and you can submit something to them if you are not sure if it's reliable, and they'll check it out. So we're also giving students, wherever possible, not only a conceptual underpinning, but we're giving them some examples of what they can do. And I'm going to talk to you now about a button that you all have in your folder. Because this idea of direct and indirect evidence, sources, you watch TV, we have the students pull apart those reports, they read, they pull them apart, direct or indirect, what kind of source. And in the end, there's only one important question. There's only one important question after they pull these things apart and answer 10 questions about every story. As a news consumer, what can I conclude about that story? That's the only important question. So, here's a story we give them. We give them a case study in the days right after, this is direct evidence, we mentioned that, right after New Orleans. In the first days after New Orleans, there were reports that civil order had totally broken down in New Orleans. Remember the convention center? The photos on television. There was a report that 10,000 people, by the way, might be dead. It turned out to be close to 1,600. But even worse, there was a report that bodies were found piled in a freezer at the convention center. These were dead bodies, including the victims of murder. There was a little girl at the convention center who was mutilated, she was raped, and her throat was slit. There was an old man who was bludgeoned to death. There was a third child killed. And in this freezer, all those bodies were piling up. And the Times-Picayune, good newspaper, put this on the front page, and they actually quoted a couple of people by name talking about this. There was only one problem. There were no murder victims in New Orleans. Not one person was murdered in the wake of Katrina. There were no murder victims piled up in that freezer. This reporter was so upset, he went back and re-interviewed every single person he talked to find out how he could get this wrong. And he did a story which we have all the students read after they read this story. And he discovered that when he went to the freezer, there were 2 National Guardsmen who opened the freezer, put a flashlight in, and said to him, there's a little girl, she's been raped, there's a guy, boom. He said, how can you tell me that? And they said, well, we didn't know it ourselves. We got that from the 2 guys who were guarding the freezer before us. So the reporter says, the biggest mistake I ever made in my life was not opening that freezer myself. And here's what happened the first time we used this case. In the next couple of weeks, students began to get up in class and began to talk about stories that had nothing to do with Katrina at all. And this is what they would say. I didn't see the reporter open the freezer. The reporter only opened the freezer partway. When I looked at that evidence to support this, I couldn't find it. And so it became a metaphor for the search for reliable evidence. We give all of our students this button at the end of the semester that says, open the freezer, lose literacy. I probably shouldn't say this in front of the president because we have such tough budget times, but in previous semesters we had 2 freezers outside. We did. They leave the lecture hall and there's a freezer. And if they have their button, they open it up. There's no body parts. Don't get excited. There's ice cream. We want them to leave. We want them to leave remembering this kind of notion, this metaphor for, as a consumer, what they have to look for. Searching for the best possible evidence. And there's our freezer. I'm going to talk about one more thing, because we're not going to have time to go through everything. And I have 5 minutes, because I feel so strongly about this. In addition to a lot of analytical tools, and this is again 28 different classes, 42 hours, this idea that the news media is biased comes up over and over and over again. When we give all the students in this class a survey the very first day, and one of the things we ask them, where they get their news, and is it reliable, we ask them, do you think the news media has a bias? What do you think? Any idea percentage-wise? Any idea? 1,200 students this semester we're teaching it. Any idea what the percentage is? It says definitely biased. Anybody? About 71%. 20% say it's a liberal bias. 16% say it's a conservative bias, which tells you something right away. 32%, this is my favorite part, feel all outlets are biased. I make them get up in class and say, you know that every outlet in America is biased? You've looked at each one? And it's very toxic. It's toxic for news consumers, and it's toxic for a news organization. And I will tell you that most students do not understand the concept of bias at all. This is how adults feel, by the way, in the new poll. So in many cases, this just mirrors the general population. And so we talk about these ideas of balance, fairness, and bias. The idea that in some stories you should be looking for balance, almost equity, right? You want to read a story about a debate, you want to get both sides. And there are times that's good. There are times that's bad. There are times that giving people balance doesn't help the news consumer, it distorts the news. Example, obvious. Ahmadinejad talks about the Holocaust never happened. If I'm doing a story about the Holocaust, and we have all these records, and 12 million people killed, and documents, and eyewitnesses, and survivors, and photos, am I going to give him equal weight in a story about the Holocaust? Would that remotely be the right thing to do for news consumers, to suggest equity? And news media is being attacked a lot in climate change. Am I going to give equal weight to people who say the earth is not warming at all? Absolutely not. Will I give more balance to scientists who disagree about the rate of our change? Absolutely. I want the students to understand fairness. Fairness is not balance, it's being fair to the evidence. It means in a story, if there's an accumulation of evidence on one side or another that is documented and can be verified, you give more weight to that. That's what a reporter should be doing. It's okay. It doesn't mean there's bias. Okay? It means the reporter is doing his or her job. And then we talk about bias. But I'm going to give you this if we have time. I don't know. We'll try this. I want you to look at this and tell me whether you think this is a fair account. A fair account.
School bus aide is busted. Police say that he wasn't helping the kids that he was supposed to be keeping an eye on. In fact, police charge that he put one student in the hospital. Fox 5's Lisa Evers is following the story from New Jersey right now. Lisa, what was this guy doing?
Lori, this 15-year-old high school freshman is lucky to be alive after the methadone overdose, and you won't believe where he got it. This is 35-year-old Parrish Jones. He was hired as a bus aide in September to supervise students as they went to and from Middletown North High School. Cops say on Monday morning he allegedly sold a vial of methadone to a 15-year-old boy on the bus. By the time he got to the high school, he was unconscious.
He wasn't breathing at one point in school, and the nurses and the police officers, the school nurses, deserve a lot of credit for saving his life.
Detective Lieutenant Joseph Capriati says their investigation is showing this was no accident, but a pre-planned drug deal.
It seems to be something that was arranged prior.
Sources say Jones has been convicted on drug-related charges. The school superintendent says it's the independently owned bus company's responsibility to do criminal background checks. But the bus company's not talking. And now cops are trying to figure out where he got the prescription heroin substitute.
We're going to see where he got it from, why he had it. If perhaps he should have been taking it himself, or if he got it, just how he obtained it, we're not sure.
Now cops also want to find out if there were...
Fair? Fair, unfair, why? So we give this to the students and we say fair or unfair, why? We're just talking about concepts here. Lots of concepts, but in the end, what I care most about is that they're going to apply these concepts for the rest of their life. What do I care about here? Is this a fair report? Why? Why? It's incomplete, why?
Because we don't know the results of what he said he wants to find out.
But that's always going to be the case. I'm not going to have time for this, but journalistic truth is provisional. You get a little every day. So we're not going to learn about that until the next day. And there's an interesting debate we had with scientists on campus, and we both agree, scientists and journalists, that truth is provisional. But what's wrong with this clip? And the second day, somebody else, what's wrong with this clip? If there's anything wrong. Do you ever hear from the bus driver? Do you ever hear from his lawyer? Do you ever hear from his family? Do you get the slightest notion that there may be another view of the events here other than what the police have given us? Is there even a line that said they tried to get to him and they couldn't? I see this. This is not fair. I suspend my belief system. I make no judgments. None. Because this is not a reliable report. And that's what we want the students to do. Is this bias? Now I say to the students, is this bias? We know it's not fair. Is it bias? Is it bias? Anybody? Is this bias? Yes or no? Anybody think it's yes? Raise your hand. Anybody think it's no? Raise your hand. Anybody thinks it's yes? Tell me quickly, because we only have 5 minutes. Tell me why it's biased. Tell me why it's biased. So what? Is that bias or is that unfairness? You may think I'm being semantic, but that's not the case. I will call on my wife to help, because we're almost out of time. Go ahead. What? It could be sloppy. They could have dropped it. The reporter could have done a bad job. It doesn't suggest necessarily, one mistake doesn't necessarily suggest bias. If I want to prove bias on the part of this news outlet, if I want to say this TV outlet, Fox, is biased against African Americans, what would I have to show? It's unfair, but what would I have to show? Omitted, but what else? Intent, it's great, but I may not get intent. What would I have to show? Exactly. I'm going to have to show that there was a predisposition that distorts my ability, and therefore what I'm going to have to show here is that there's a pattern of unfairness. If the last 10 times Fox did a story about an African-American defendant and they never got his comment, and yet somehow they always found a way to comment if it was a Caucasian, aha! Now I have an indication and it may be biased. One example does not prove bias by itself. So we want students, when they leave this class, to at least understand the basic notions of what bias is. And the thing that really is important is when you have any assessment of bias, it doesn't apply to the news media. You can't prove a pattern. You can do one outlet. And it doesn't involve the opinion part of the broadcast or the newspaper. If we had another half hour, I'd give you a whole lecture on the difference between news and opinion and how do you spot it. Because if you confuse those two, you can also get confused about what's biased and what isn't. And finally, it may be us. It may have nothing to do with the news outlet. There have been incredible studies done about how you and me, how we deal with information. The psychology department of the university has collaborated with us on this part of the course. We brought them in. And what happens, this is a study. Last year, Mideast researchers, 2 years ago, took 6 clips of the war in Lebanon in 1982. 25 years ago. The clips were all vetted. They're all reliable. They showed them to 144 Palestinians and 144 Israelis. And what do you think? And they asked them to count the positive or negative references to Israel. What do you think happened? What do you think happened? Tell me what you think. What did the Israelis find?
We under some suffering too much.
Negative reactions. You made Israel look bad. They show it to the Palestinians. What do the Palestinians say? You made the Israelis look good. Same reality. People emotionally involved. Now, they test for a subgroup of people who are the most educated, they know most about the war, and they have the highest levels of education. Most of them go to college. What happens to the bias? Tell me what happens to the bias. What? More moderated? It goes up. It goes up. Because if you are a partisan and you think you're smart, you're the hardest kind of person to be open to information that challenges your belief system. It's harder for you. That's scary. It means education by itself is not an inoculation. You have to be aware of how your brain functions and what's going on. We've all met people who are so smart, they know everything. That's exactly what's going on. Cognitive dissonance should at some point switch, right, Jim? Cognitive dissonance shows you that here's what psychologists have learned about our brains. We deflect and distort information that disagrees with what we believe. We all want to believe that we're right all the time. That's one. Two, we forget within 72 hours where information comes from. It's called the sleeper effect or source amnesia. So if I get something in an ad, by the way, that's the news literacy concept of the brain. It may not be anatomically correct, but I know you probably. You know, we have our critical thinking part, we have our emotional center, etc. And this lights up in the lecture. Source amnesia means you forget where you get information, but here's the scariest part. When I ask you to where you remember where you get your information, you attribute it to a more reliable source. The psychologists have found this, because you want to take the most reliable source you can find, because you're making a case. You may have seen it in People magazine, and you're saying the New York Times says this. No, this is true. This is true. So the students have to be very aware of this. They have to understand how to guard against it, and they have to be given tools, which we give them, key questions to ask. Okay? They've even hooked up Democratic and Republican brains, by the way. And neuroscientists have found that when these are partisan people, and when they're shown clips of their candidate that cast their candidates in a negative light, the part of their brain that lights up like a Christmas tree is the emotional center of the brain. For 18 minutes, these people watch information that challenge their assumptions, and their emotional center lights up for 18 minutes. The critical thinking part of the brain never lit up in 18 minutes, which means that we have to train our students to turn on their critical parts of their brain at certain points. So I'm going to come to the very end. I went through cognitive dissonance. We went through source amnesia. To me, these are crucial things. One of the biggest obstacles to being a smart news consumer is recognizing this and being able to overcome it. I told you before, 28% of Republicans don't believe Barack Obama was born in America. And 30% are not sure. Come on. There was a birth announcement in the paper. Somebody said they were very clever. They arranged to have that birth announcement. They knew in advance. Okay, what's going on? It's because these people don't like Barack Obama. They don't want to believe the evidence. And we got to get our students to be really, really vigilant in this matter. John Sexton, is it possible in America today to convince anyone of anything he doesn't already believe? This is a toxic problem for the country. We talk about being a great research university. This is how we're trying to deal with, to me, one of the key problems in America. The ability to communicate together, to begin to come together as a society and as a country and make decisions that make sense. Okay? I'm going to give you an assignment. I'm going to end the lecture. Here's your assignment. Everybody take this down. I want you all to go to this site and take a test to find out if you're biased. This is a site called Project Implicit. It's run by Harvard University. You can take our test in many categories. Young versus old, fat versus skinny, straight versus gay. We make all our students take this test. And it will tell you in 5 minutes whether you harbor an implicit bias and why. It's very interesting research, and I don't want to spoil it for you and tell you how they do it. It's worth you doing. Our job is to push our students out of their comfort zone. So I'm going to skip this and go right to the end because Brent is right here. Jen, we're just going to have to, where's Jen? Okay, I want to go right to the end. I won't deal with journalistic truth. We don't have time, and how journalistic truth and scientific truth. We now know why, by the way, Beethoven died, and we now know why Mozart died, and we talk about this and the importance of following a story over time. I have left you in your folder, so we're not going to spend any time in this. Are 12 lessons for how to be a smart news consumer. George Turkelbaum, you're right, is a hoax. What scares me about George Turkelbaum, it's on HR sites all over America. It keeps coming back. He may die in that office space. He never dies on the internet. And why? Because people want to believe it. Most people believe American workplaces have become anonymous, so they accept it. The critical thinking part of their brains go down. Swine flu, you'll be assured that there's lots of information that's reliable on swine flu. There's lots of information that's documented that we point our students to.
This course you take experience away with you, and I find that experience is more of something that you acquire in real life and not necessarily just in school. But this, I'm going to keep it for life.
You know, whenever I'm reading or I'm watching the TV news now, I'm always asking myself a lot more questions. I'm kind of looking at it more critically. You know, I'm kind of evaluating the source. Like, is the story really being fair? Is it biased? I'm definitely asking myself a lot more questions than I used to, where I kind of was just like a mindless. I just kind of look at it and like accept it. Now I kind of want to kind of inquire more as to what's really going on.
I'm an international student, so I would like to tell my friends way back home too that how important it is to be a good news consumer. That's what I've learned from this class, to be a good news consumer.
We weren't exactly shameless. These were pretty typical of the responses we got. We have a Center for News Literacy, as the president said, that's now exporting these ideas to other universities and high schools. You can come and sit in on any of our lectures. You are more than welcome, if you want to contact us and come and sit in on any of our lectures. I apologize for not giving you lots of time to ask questions, but I think your bus tours are starting soon. What?
They have tickets.
You have tickets to bus tours. But again, if any of you want to come to the lectures or see me afterwards, I'll be out in the lobby, and thank you very much for coming.